Mariam Matthew, CEO of Manorama Online and the leadership at Manorama Online, and to my many friends in the Manorama family, to all of you who have assembled here today at this Tech Expectations, the first one I'm told after the COVID pandemic. I bid you a good morning and Ellarikum Namaskaram. First of all, let me thank Manorama Online for inviting me to speak here today. And more importantly, I think more than having me over, I think thank you for organizing this very important meeting of minds, meeting of young minds to discuss what is clearly a very exciting time in the history of India, to talk about technology today and technology in the future, what that represents in terms of opportunities, especially for the young Indian in Kerala and all around the country and the world. I was just noticing that you mentioned Manorama Online is 25 years old, and I flashed back to the time that I was an entrepreneur like many of you, full of idealism and hope and dreams, building India's first cellular network. And lo and behold, one of the markets that I was building the network was Kerala. Everybody said I was doomed to fail, that the category was a category that would not succeed in India. And of course, Kerala being Kerala of the 90s, that certainly I would give up and leave. And that was 27 years ago. And I can't believe that it has been 27 years ago, because it just seemed like a few years ago that we were building out this entire category of digital networks. And here we are today in 2022, 27 years on, 25 years on after Manorama Online, looking at digital not as an outlier, not as something on the fringes, not like something that a few people spoke about or talked about, but something that is deeply embedded in terms of our opportunities as we see the future, in terms of our economy, as we see the growth of our economy. And so congratulations to Manorama Online for pioneering the digital movement in Kerala with Manorama Online 25 years ago, for seeing the future in a way that few people saw it then. And congratulations for hosting this year's Tech Expectation. Let me start by telling you something that I deeply believe in, and I'm using this forum to share my thoughts rather than pontificate or give you gyan. I certainly say with all of the conviction at my command that we are living at the most interesting time, opportunity-rich time ever in the history of independent India. And when I make presentations to groups of students in colleges all around the country, I always characterize the time that we are living in as an inflection point for India, for Indians, and in particular, young Indians. Let me share an example of how the world sees this if we don't see it enough ourselves. Recently, I led a delegation of startups, 30 startups to the UK for a program. It was a seminar, it was a conference for 2 days. And after I landed in London, the High Commissioner who received me said, Mr. Chandrasekhar, there are 7 ministers of the UK government, the British government, who want to meet you. And like every other politician, I thought, I've suddenly become very popular. I've become this great man that global people want to meet me. And so I was very pleased with myself, till somebody broke the news to me that actually they didn't want to meet me. They wanted to meet the 30 startups. Nevertheless, those 2 days, the 30 startups engaged with these different ministers. They were very impressed. And the last day, which was a Sunday, there was a breakfast at 10 Downing Street. Boris Johnson was then still Prime Minister. He was not going to be Prime Minister in 4 days after that breakfast, but he didn't know that at that point, I presume. And he gave us his breakfast, and at the end of the breakfast, he came to me, held my hand, and he said, "What is it that you are putting in the water and the food that you feed these youngsters in India? What is it that makes them so impressive, ambitious, and confident?" And I said, "I don't think we are doing anything special. We are just basically enabling every young Indian to dream, and more importantly, as a government, enabling those dreams to become reality." So that is the India that we are living in today. It is an absolutely brilliant time to be an entrepreneur. It is an absolutely the best time ever to be a young Indian. A little context in how we have gotten so far, where we have reached. In 2015, when the Digital India program was launched by our Prime Minister, he laid out 3 very clear outcomes and goals that he wanted to meet. You know that even before 2015, India was known as a tech country. We had the Infosys, the HCLs, the Wipros, the TCSs of the world that were serving large numbers of companies and enterprises all around the world. We were seen as a outsourcing BPO back office to the world. So there was a narrative that existed pre-2014. So it was not like we discovered technology in 2014. But in 2015, there was in a sense, a restatement of our national goals and priorities. And the Prime Minister said at that point that number 1, the technology should transform ordinary citizens' lives and make an impact on governance and democracy. The second thing he said is that the digital economy piece of our economy must grow and therefore create more and more opportunities for our young Indians. And the third point, as important as the first 2, is that India must cease to be a consumer of technology and be a producer of technologies, lead the world in future technologies going forward, and not just be a bland consumer of Western technologies. These are the 3 broad goals. And I will present to you that if we were to report card those 3 goals today, on the first part, there is absolutely no doubt that for decades, a country that was seen as a dysfunctional democracy where government, and there was a famous quote where 100 rupees left Delhi, 15 rupees reached the beneficiary because of all the leakage and corruption in between. That defined Indian democracy and Indian governance for decades. That has been turned on its head today. And today, when a subsidy or a benefit or a pension leaves the government exchequer, it reaches the beneficiary's account without any delay, without any leakage, without any corruption, without any mediation. That is the power of technology, and that is what technology has done to transform the lives of the common citizen. And I will give you a stark example of how I've experienced this. Recently, as part of my political responsibilities, I have a responsibility to go to Nagaland, which is in the northeast. I went to a district called Zuniboto, where people had not been visited by a minister for 60 years. And early morning, there was a community meeting, and I just asked them a question: how many of you get your pensions by DBT? How many of you get your benefits and subsidies by DBT? And out of the 500 odd people that were there, everybody put up their hand. So even in the remotest part of India today, technology is enabling governments to build trust. Technology is enabling governments to reach those who were never reached before. So that is on the first objective of Digital India. The second was about entrepreneurship, expanding the digital economy. If you just look at the numbers, the digital economy used to be about 4% of the GDP, 5% of the GDP, if you round it off to the next 10 billion. And by 25-26, we are going to be 20% of the GDP. So for $5 trillion GDP, 5th largest economy in the world, is going to have a $1 trillion digital economy powered by not the 4 big guys, not the 4 big companies, by hundreds and thousands of startups, hundreds and thousands of unicorns, and hundreds and thousands of young Indians building enterprises, creating jobs, creating investments, creating economic activity. So that is the digital economy report card. You are aware today we have over 80,000 startups. Over 109 of them have at some point touched the $1 billion unicorn mark. Some have dropped back because of the recent geopolitical issues. But that we are today a digital economy that the world admires, the world looks at with awe and respect, and in some cases envy, is absolutely inarguable. The third is about where are we vis-a-vis the technology and platforms and devices and products of the future. For 30 years, and I use this my example again and again, when I built my cellular networks here in Kerala or Mumbai or Maharashtra or Puducherry or Tamil Nadu, every piece of equipment was imported. Every piece of software, including the billing software, was imported. Excepting for the screwdriver that tightened the screws on a cabinet, which were probably Indian, but everything was imported. And today we are at a time and a place where in the emerging 5G era, in the era of semiconductors and microelectronics, in the era of software as a service, internet-delivered platforms, India and young Indians are designing, architecting solutions, platforms, devices, and products that range from 5G systems all the way to AI for the world and for Indian markets. So we have progressed considerably from being just a consumer of technologies to being a country that is architecting and designing and delivering solutions. And if you think this is political rhetoric or this is a speech made by a politician, let me give you a sharp example, simple example. The India stack, which is really a collection of all of the applications in digital government and e-governance that have been built since 2014 and is now organized as a beautiful stack, starting with the identity authentication layer of the Aadhaar, going to the fintech UPI, CoWIN for wellness, education, skills, etc., etc. 8 countries, 7 to 8 countries are going to sign up and implement that India stack in the coming months around the world. So if there is any evidence or any measure that you want to take of where India stands in terms of the rest of the world, in terms of delivering technologies for the future, this is a classic example of that. Let me just quickly end by sharing some thoughts about the future of tech. I think it was suggested in the opening remarks that technology is going to increasingly be determining the future of the world's economies, trade, geopolitics. You can see how China is squaring off with Taiwan. I can assure you it's not because they want that small island, but it's because they see what Taiwan has that China can never have and can never even think of having on their own, which is world-leading semiconductor manufacturing and process technology. So even geopolitics are being ranged around and driven around the contours of where technology lies, who's innovating, who's controlling that technology. And I would argue that innovation is a normal, it is the new normal, it is disruption is the new normal, and what you are seeing today with the reset of the Google monopoly with the Bing ChatGPT combo, who would have thought 2 years ago that the monopoly or the dominance of Google could ever be challenged? And here we are, 2 years after that, where OpenAI and ChatGPT working with a search engine that was almost absent from the landscape, suddenly being back in the game. So disruption, innovation is the new normal, and I will share with you that the digital economy that consisted in 2014 or pre-2014 of only IT and ITES companies, that pie has expanded. We have seen in the last 4 years or 3 years, the internet and the D2C, the consumer tech companies proliferate, the Flipkarts, the e-commerce companies with scale, with size that are globally being globally attracting attention. But going forward, the pie, the areas in which innovation, capital, and products and services and devices will further be built are deep tech, whether it is semiconductors, whether it's microelectronics design, high performance computing, automobile computing, mobility. Then there is AI and what I call the data economy around the AI, learning, language translation. Then there is a whole aspect of the internet, as Mariam mentioned, about what are the adjacent areas about a safe and trusted internet that creates innovation opportunities, cyber security, the Web 3.0, blockchain. And in particular, one point I want to share with you, which may not be intuitively connected to technology, is the whole creative space. One of the amazing phenomena that you have seen recently is South Indian movies suddenly garnering huge amounts of audience and eyeballs and revenues where none existed before, or where they were limited to just their geography or their state. And that is through the power of the OTTs and the power of dubbing. AI and simultaneous automatic real-time language translation, which is just around the corner as a technology, which the government of India has invested a considerable amount of money, will totally disrupt content creation, movie creation in a way that nobody can imagine. A producer of a movie in Kerala today, whose business model was built around selling that rights of that digital rights of the movie to, let's say, Manorama or Asianet or a producer or a distributor, will suddenly find that he or she can make that product available in multiple languages, shot simultaneously one time without having to reshoot it, and having language translation being done on the fly without dubbing, without redubbing, reducing costs and increasing the audience. So therefore, technology, AI is going to even disrupt the traditional areas of creative content creation in a manner that I think even now, I think at this stage, we cannot even envisage. I will end here by saying, again, that I have spent 35 years in tech, and so for those who don't think I'm old, I am old. But there has never been a time in the history of this country where technology and the future of technology has looked as bright as it does today. So for those entrepreneurs today, those startups who are celebrating their dreams, their businesses, their visions, I congratulate you, and to all of those who are listening and are part of the audience to the celebration of tech entrepreneurship, I say, don't sit on the sidelines, join this celebration, realize your dreams, build your startup, build your companies, and the areas in which there are opportunities for the young Indian are far and wide and very, very diverse. So I wish you all the very best. Thank you again for inviting me to speak today, and I wish you again all the best. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Sir, if I could just request you to just be on stage. We are crowdsourcing a few questions, okay, and we have received some questions. So thank you for using the app to send across your questions. And the first question is, in 2014, you campaigned hard to ensure that all our armed forces, 14 lakh armed forces from around, earlier they had to come to their village or town to vote, but you said they should vote in their place of posting, and that made a huge difference. Now the question from Pinto Manuel is, when can we expect elderly or all of us to vote using our mobile phones sitting from our homes?
It's a good question. I think, and I think it is a problem that can be solved, accepting that you've seen that in our politics and in our democracy, which is a noisy one and it's a very raucous one, even the EVMs are being challenged whenever there is an adverse decision that comes out of the EVM. So I think The technology part about remote voting or online voting is not a problem that is very complicated to solve. But I think the fact that we have to bring in more and more trust, more and more awareness about how safe it is and how secure is the process, that has to be built. And it has to be something that is not thrust on the voters as much as something that the voters seek. And it is part of the evolution of our democracy. And I think we should wait for a critical mass of Indians that say, no, we want this, rather than having one misguided minister going out and trying to champion this.
Thank you for that. In 2014, the Ease of Doing Business report, is a very prestigious one, ranked us 142 out of 195 countries. That is abysmally low. But now, in 2022, in the latest report, we have climbed up to 63. But 63 itself is a very low number,
Right.
judging from. So what should we do in order to make them to single digit?
And I think this is one of the biggest changes in India for a young Indian, is that, and I'll share my experience with you. I can certainly put on whatever, piece of paper that needs to be signed off on that. Entrepreneurship 27 years ago, or indeed 10, 15 years ago, was a much more difficult process. Because the government's relationship with entrepreneurship, whether they were state governments or central government, was always a very suspicious one at the very best, or at the very worst, it was a relationship that was a very quid pro quo one. And I'll share one example, personal example with the young people in the audience. When I built out my first cellular network, and I was the first one to build it out in Mumbai, I still needed a government minister's sign-off on the file before I could launch it commercially. And there was a famous minister those days called Sukram. Some of you journalists will remember him. And I was a 27-year-old, and he said in Hindi, "Come home." So I went home. With those days, there was no PowerPoint. There was a big, heavy projector. You had to carry an overhead projector and slides on foils. I made these slide presentation. He looked remarkably uninterested and bored. And he nodded, and then I went off. And he did this 2 more times. And I kept telling myself and my wife that this is the most exciting time for me, because a minister is calling me to his house, giving me this coffee and biscuits and making me give a presentation to him. And I thought that I'd reached the height of my entrepreneurship career. Turns out, in the 3rd visit, he says to me in Hindi, "Aapke ghar mein koi buzurg nahi hai. Don't you have any older person in your house who can understand why I'm calling you?" So that has, in a lot of ways, being replaced by an environment where ministers like us, the government departments, are measured on how many successful startups and entrepreneurship we have enabled, we have supported, we have created. That is the change. Now, why are we 63 and why are we not 1? India, as you know, is not just government of India. There's government and there's a state governments. And it is certainly a case that I can make to you, and I certainly think all of you will agree, that all state governments are not performing at the same level of transparency and support to entrepreneurship and investments as other states are. Some states are very good at it. Some states continue to cling on to the vestiges of the past. So, in a sense, that 63 represents the average of the very good, the good, and the still very bad. And that number is 63. And I hope the very, very bad will continue to understand that there is no place, and this is not a time for that, and they must improve, and that number will go up.
Thank you, sir. One last question, and this is from Sudeep S. Thank you, Sudeep. How is the government working to address the issue of data privacy and bank security protection, especially because there are uneducated or undereducated people who could be taken for a ride?
Certainly, good question, and I think you will agree, and I think most of you are informed will agree, that exploitation of personal data is an ongoing thing for a number of large companies and small companies around the world. It's not just an India phenomenon. It is something that has gone on for many years by many of these so-called big companies whom I will not name today. And in a sense, the needle has come full circle, and we have now moved to the other end, where the citizens' rights are as important as innovation. And so we have a draft digital personal data protection bill that has gone through consultation for the last 2 months, which we will be bringing to Parliament very shortly. It is a bill that protects the individual's right to privacy, data protection. It also allows innovation to continue, but with some fetters and rules, and also lays out the clear conditions under which the government in emergent situations can access personal data. So I think we have a modern, contemporary piece of legislation that is around the corner, and that will address a lot of the challenges that individuals face in a growing data economy and a growing digitized world.